This week, I'm talking jewel heists with Mailan Doquang from her debut thriller Blood Rubies that I just had so much fun reading. It is an action packed jewel heist thriller that spans multiple countries, and I just couldn't put it down. It was amazing. But it is about Rune Sarasin, who is about to learn just how quickly the life of a jewel thief can spiral out of control. 7 days are all it takes for Rune Sarasin's life to completely derail. It starts with a typical lifting a pouch of rubies from the Bangkok hotel room of wealthy smuggler Charles Lemaire. Rune nearly gets caught, and Lemaire's goons give chase, but they are no match for the clever motorbike maneuvers of Rune and her boyfriend Kit. As the high of the chase wears off, Kit delivers some terrifying news that his teenage sister Madee has gone missing. They track her cell phone to the dangerous Khlong Toei, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, slum, but the trail ends there. The night gets even worse when Rune just realizes she lost the pouch of gems somewhere in the slum while searching for Madee. Charles Lemaire is the wrong man to mess with. He is a perfectionist when it comes to both his attire and his crimes, and he isn't even afraid to kill to get what he wants. When he catches up to Rune and Kit, he gives Rune an option: return his rubies or she will never see her boyfriend again. Now Rune must race against time to either recover the lost gems or find something even more valuable with which to ransom Kit back from Lemaire. But she also still needs to find out what happened to Madee. As Rune investigates deeper into the shadows of the Khlong Toei slum, she uncovers a web of crimes with consequences far more insidious than just one missing girl and a handful of stolen rubies. I said it in my review, and you'll hear me talk about it in the interview too. This book has such a strong sense of place. It really feels like you're reading a spy thriller. So it's a jewel heist, but I think fans of like action and spy thrillers in that sense would really enjoy it as well. And it made so much sense to me after I read it that I found out that Mailan is a architectural historian, and I was like, oh, everything makes sense about how like strongly I like felt like I was exactly where these characters were. She dives into that a little bit more on this episode, so let's get into it. Before we totally dive into the book, I did want to get to know a little bit about you. So when did you know that you wanted to be an author, or when were you like, I have a story I need to write?
So I started writing fiction, it's fairly recently, like 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always written. I was, an English major in college, so I did a lot of reading and writing about literature. And writing has been central to my work as an art and architectural historian. As a graduate student, had to produce a dissertation, which is essentially a book. I never published that dissertation, but I published a book on a different topic in 2018 with Oxford. And I realized after I published that book that what I loved most about academia wasn't the research or the teaching, though I enjoy both those things, but it was
Mm.
really the writing, like the process of creating a narrative and putting it down on the page. And I
Yeah.
also realized that I didn't want to write, I didn't want to produce any more academic work. As an academic, my work it's been really narrow. Like
Mm-hmm.
we get very specialized, and I had this sense that I was always addressing the same sort of narrow group of people, like in my writing and at conferences. And so I was sort of at an impasse because on the one hand, I wanted to keep writing. On the other hand, I didn't want to write academic stuff anymore. So I don't want to say that fiction was a whim, but was
Mm.
definitely not the most thought out decision that I've made. I'd never
Yeah.
taken a creative writing course. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about commercial publishing. And in some ways
Mm-hmm.
that was good because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I sort of
Yeah.
left in. And, I don't know that I would have leapt in quite so willingly if I'd been more aware of the obstacles that
Yeah.
you face as an author, right? It's not just the writing, but like everything that comes after you've produced the book, like from querying and trying to find the right agent to
Yes.
connecting with the right editor. So I leapt in and wrote my first book, which will never see the light of day. It was, this. It was a thriller, and it had every mistake that one can make writing a novel. I made with that first effort. Um,
Practicing. Yeah.
Yes, that's a generous way of saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. It had like 12 point of view characters or something insane like that.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, it was completely bananas. Um,
Yeah.
but but I fell in love with writing fiction. It was like the most rewarding type of writing that I've ever done, and
Wow.
yeah, and so I decided to try again, and that's the product is Blood Rubies.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Um, so you've kind of written for a long time, but
Mhm.
more academic, and
Yeah.
um I mean, I just think it's cool getting to a point where you're like, well, now why not take a stab at fiction, like switch it up a little bit. So you mentioned you had like this first book you wrote
Hmm.
with all your characters,
Yes.
and now you've written Blood. Excuse me. Now you've written Blood Rubies.
Hmm.
What does your fiction writing process look like now, and was it influenced by any of your academic writing?
Yeah, in kind of general ways, academia helped me, and sort of
Hmm.
specifically my field of study helped me a lot, which is
Yeah.
architecture and urbanism. So, writing is writing. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm writing an academic book or article or a novel. They both require, a huge amount of work and rigor and commitment. It's a commitment that you have to make kind of. For me, it's like it's not just one day, like, oh, I'm going to write, I'm going to write a book. It's a commitment that I have to
Yeah.
make over and over. Every time I carve out time to write, I have to kind of recommit to writing because
Yes.
it's hard, right? It's a lot of work. So in terms of discipline, my academic background was a huge help.
Mm.
And then my field of study is architecture and urbanism. So, you know, I I put space and place at the center of my writing in terms of, in my academic writing. And so that's also my point of departure for fiction. Like with Blood Rubies, I started with setting. I really wanted to write a story that was set in New York and Bangkok. New York has been my home for the bulk of my adult life. Bangkok is where it's like one of my favorite cities. It's where my husband did his research, and so I like barnacled myself to him on his research trip.
Yes.
And so I really love the city, and yeah, and that's where I started. I just wanted to write these two places,
Hmm.
and everything else came after that: characters,
Yeah.
plot, everything. Yeah, which I think is probably a weird way of writing, but most people have an idea about plot first. But yeah, I started with place.
That's cool because that was going to be one of my follow up questions. I read your Dear Reader letter where
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned that you were an architectural historian. So I was going to ask, like, how that affected the book because, from my perspective, it was, I mean, before I'd read your Dear Reader letter, um in my review I talked about like it has such a strong sense of place, and so
Hmm.
then for me it kind of made it feel even more, it's not a spy thriller because it is like jewel heist thriller, but the like really strongly rooted locations and like they feel very real, and the way they're like navigating the cities when they're like trying to get away from people. I didn't know that I was gonna be clearing my throat this whole time. Um, it felt very real, and I feel like it made it more kind of like cinematic is typically the word I use in this case, where like it felt like in spy shows where you're like you get the little typed screen that's like Bangkok, like when you're switching locations basically. So that really came through for me. So I think it's kind of cool and unique that that's already where you knew that it was just like how you were going to start was setting, since that's kind of already where you were coming from.
I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because the setting is so important. I worked so hard to try to drop readers into these places. I mean,
Hmm.
it helps that I've been to both places and that I know them pretty
Yeah.
well. You know, they've both had kind of a huge impact on my life. But yeah, I think that the way that I write about architecture as an academic isn't just, you know, I don't just look at the way that buildings look. You know, it's not just form, it's not just design, or even meaning. But what I do is I like to think about how people would have navigated these spaces, you know, and the impact of architecture and urbanism on how you move, how you feel. Your environment always pushes back on you, right? Like there are ways that it
Hmm.
impacts you, and that's definitely something that I do in my work as an architectural historian, and something that I definitely carried over in fiction.
Yeah. So once you kind of had your settings, and I think that I'm sure it did help that you had like lived in both locations. Once you kind of knew the setting feel, how did you get to know your characters? Or like how did you kind of develop them?
Right. So I would say that the I needed a protagonist who made sense in both
Mm,
places. And I didn't set out to write a mixed race character, which sounds so strange because I'm mixed race, and I kind of
yeah.
really leaned into it once I came to that decision. But it really
Yeah.
wasn't the intention at the outset. It was really, you know,
Mm,
setting. And then I needed someone who you know, who really made sense in Bangkok and New York. And in retrospect, you know, it could have gone in a different way. Like I could have made her, there's so many backpackers, right? Like people from
yeah.
America and Europe who go to Southeast Asia and backpack. So she could have been that. But I, you know, I made her a mixed race, and then really leaned into that. Um, drawing on, you know, my experiences as growing up mixed race, and my siblings and other people I know. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like I wanted, you know, I like anti-heroes. So I knew from the outset that I wanted to write a story that was about a thief. I love heists.
Hmm.
I always have. Um, when I was young, my mom used to check out Maurice Leblanc's Arsène Lupin books, and so like this idea of the gentleman thief has been with me
Yeah.
for a really long time, and I just
That's
love this idea.
cool.
Yeah, I just think that anti-heroes are fascinating for readers and for writers, right? Like as readers,
Yeah.
like they're, you know, they challenge us to face truths about
Hmm.
who we are as humans, right? Like
Hmm.
entirely good, not entirely bad. Like that line is very blurred. And as a
Hmm.
writer, they build suspense into the story because
Yes.
you never know like what the anti-hero is going to do, right? Because a hero, like
Hmm.
a traditional hero, will behave in a predictably heroic way, right? Like
Right.
Jack Reacher is going to do the right thing. He's going to go after the bad guy, and the villain's
Yes.
going to do the same thing, right? The villain behaves in a predictably villainous way.
Hmm.
But the anti-hero is like you never really know. And I wanted to kind of tap into that with Rune. I
Hmm.
wanted a thief. I wanted someone who often does the wrong thing, so that it's like for one thing, it, you know, it makes them more human to me. It makes a character more human, but also it builds
Hmm.
suspense into a story in a way that you have to achieve in different ways when you're dealing with a like a conventional hero. So yeah, so the
Yeah.
desire, I guess, to write a mixed race character on the one hand, and then write an anti-hero. So all these things kind of coalesced. Um, and yeah, and then I, you know, I don't outline. So the characters sort of become more complete in my mind and in my writing as I
Hmm.
do the work of writing.
Yeah. That's cool. What I talk about anti-heroes a lot because, well, I think they're kind of prevalent in thrillers too, so that's
Yeah.
probably some of where that comes from. But I've always found them so intriguing because I also feel like we kind of live vicariously through them in some cases. So it's like they're to be an anti-hero and not completely a villain. It's something where you're like you understand their motivations and like you know why they're doing what they're doing, and in most cases there's some loosely defined greater good even if it's a little bit like gray.
Yes.
And so I think it's fun because we kind of get to like imagine like what if I had something that like I maybe needed to do some shady stuff to achieve? So like you kind of like live through the idea of like getting to act that out without like actually doing it in your real life. So I think they're always fun for that reason. Like you get to like all of us kind of want to do some like crazy or maybe a little bit risky stuff for all kinds of reasons. And with anti-heroes, we kind of get to like do that journey from our couch safely.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, there's so much about thrillers that feature anti-heroes that I love. And that's
Mhm.
one, what all the things you said, absolutely. And then like the vicarious travel for me is another big thing. Like you mentioned
Yeah.
spy thrillers, and so many of them are set in these kind of, far-flung locations, some of them really glamorous. And
Hmm.
I love traveling. I don't get to do it as much as I can, as much as I'd like. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, doing it like vicariously, like what you're saying with the anti-hero, we kind of live out our darker,
Hmm.
our darker
Yes.
fantasies. Then, yeah, like so much of that is the
Yeah.
thrill of the thriller, right?
Hmm.
But with
Totally.
anti-heroes, like
When
I
so you knew you kind of wanted an anti-hero. Is that what led you to her being a jewel thief, or where did you decide the kind of like jewel heist perspective?
So that also is something that came as I wrote. So initially, I
Oh,
wanted to
nice.
sort of, I'm just like, it's so funny because I
You're like,
wish I
I'm a pantser.
I wish I were a plotter because, it seems like it would be so comforting to have an outline at the outset, but so many things came as I did the work of writing.
Yeah.
So initially, I wanted to write a book that dealt with, because I'm coming from an art background, like I'm really interested in like the illegal trade in cultural property, like antiquities, trafficking, that kind of thing, right? But then
Yes.
because I'd chosen Bangkok as sort of the central location of the book, it made sense to go with jewels and
Yeah.
gemstones because Bangkok is a huge center for the gemstone trade. Like it's recognized, it's a global center for,
Hmm.
processing gemstones and the buying and selling of gemstones. So it just made sense to go in that direction.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And then it kind of the subplot, I'm trying to remember if that's in the synopsis or not. I don't want to spoil it, but so kind of one of the subplots gets into like the other crime that is like other crimes that are prevalent there as well. So did you have to do any research for any of that stuff, or was it just kind of like from living there, you kind of knew what could be happening there?
So, there, I think in any big city, there are,
Mm-hmm.
there's organized crime and different types of
Mm-hmm.
crime, different types of trafficking, from like gun trafficking to drugs to human trafficking. And so, yeah, I had to, you want to ground the work in, you want to ground the book in reality. And so I
Mm.
did do research for the book. Most of it was, just reading articles about the types of crimes that happen in Bangkok, the types of crime that are, that it's known for, and some that it's
Mm-hmm.
not that well known for. Like I think, people think Bangkok and they think human trafficking, they think the sex trade.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, it's only one aspect of the type of trafficking that occurs in most
Yeah.
major cities, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but most of it was I was able to do from sort of reading newspaper articles and sort of
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was mentioning earlier how it felt really cinematic in a lot of the different scenes when they're like rushing through the streets or like trying to hide in different places. Um are you like do you watch like action movies? Were you like acting it out in your head? Like how are you writing like the more intense action scenes?
100%. I am a huge fan of thrillers and heists in particular, and I will devour them in
Nice.
all their forms, like true crime, true crime, novels, television series, movies. It doesn't matter. If there were a
Yeah.
heist ballet, I would go. Like
Yes.
I just love them. And so, yeah, and I think, when I write, I do visualize the scenes
Mhm.
and I try to walk people through them, walk readers through them the way that
Mhm.
the characters are experiencing them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and that includes, being attentive to details about the setting, whether it's the sights or the sounds or the smells or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be really attentive to that, to immerse readers in the place, and try
Yeah.
to get them to come along on this journey that the characters are on.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I felt that for sure. You have, so there's, we're not like totally in the perspective of the bad guy, but we have some
Mm-hmm.
chapters with him. He is like dark and terrible and kind of terrifying. Was it like, I know like plenty of people write like really scary characters like that, but was there like anything difficult about like just like writing some of the horrific stuff that he did?
Um, I mean, I think that it's so funny. I was just at the Edgars and got a chance
Uh-huh.
to talk to a lot of other authors who,
Yeah.
find creative ways of describing, people's deaths and murders. And it's really
Yeah.
because one person was telling me that, thriller writers and mystery writers are kind of the nicest people because we get our
Yeah.
aggressions out in our writing, like this kind
Yeah.
of darkness, with
Yes.
our villains. Like we tap into whether it's, dark thoughts that we have or things that we see
Mm.
sort of in the world, like in the news or in our environments. Like I think that we tap into those things and put them
Mhm.
on the page. So that's what I did. Like we all have kind of
Yeah.
dark aspects of our personalities, and like there are so many dark things going on in the world. So it's for me, it's not hard to imagine
Mhm.
a really, really kind of dangerous, violent person is not
Yes.
it's not that far of a stretch to imagine, right?
Right.
But weirdly, it doesn't like they don't stay with me. The bad
Yeah.
characters and the dark that those don't like I don't carry those.
Yeah. Yeah, they are, and it is like really short chapters that you're ever
Yeah.
like navigating his world with him basically. So
Mhm.
that would totally make sense too. Um so do you have any ideas for a next book? Are you working on anything else?
So I recently submitted the second, I guess, part of Blood Rubies
Mhm.
to my
Okay,
editors.
that's what I thought I saw.
Yeah, so that's in, out of my hands now, which is really nice.
Nice.
But yeah, and then I've been working on a standalone for a while that's pretty
Oh,
different.
nice.
Yeah, it's a lot quieter. It's not as kind of action forward as Blood Rubies
Mhm.
and Blood Rubies 2, which does not have a title yet.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's more of a psychological thriller, and it's
Ooh.
about yeah, and it does what I sort of had set out to do, with Blood Rubies, tapping into sort of my area of expertise. And so it's about a Vietnamese museum curator whose life unravels after she becomes the victim of a violent crime. So it's New York
Oh
based.
man.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah.
it's in early stages. So kind of still at a really exciting time because it's so open ended right now.
Yeah. That is so cool. I thought I saw something about Blood Rubies too, but like as I was about to ask the question, my brain was like, "Wait, am I mixing my memories?" So I'm glad I'm not crazy. I thought I saw something about a sequel, so
And I call
that'll
it
be
Blood
super
Rubies
fun.
2. Yeah, I call it Blood
Yeah,
Rubies 2 or Rune 2.
there we go. I love that. Well, I've been asking people at the end, if they have read anything recently that they loved or watched, like just anything. I know some people don't read while they're writing, so if you also haven't, that's okay too.
I am an avid reader and I read really broadly. So I love like everything
Yeah.
from like memoirs to, true crime and heist. Like I kind of read really broadly.
Yeah.
That's there are like two books that stand out, staying with the kind of heist theme. I read
Mhm.
David Gordon, yeah, The Pigeon, which is
Okay.
it's about a guy who steals a pigeon, $1 million pigeon, which is like the greatest premise for a heist.
It
So
is.
it's a racing pigeon that he steals from an Upper West Side apartment, and it's actually like not at all the kind of thing I normally read because I like to usually travel. Like I like, this is a New York based book, and
Oh.
it's like grittier than what I, and it's got like a lot of humor. It's fabulous. It's
Mm.
great. And then and that's like a recent, I think that came out just last year.
All
And
right.
then I've been reading, this is a little older, but it's a true crime book about this young American guy who was studying, I think he was studying like music in London, and he
Okay.
stole like 300 bird specimens from a natural history museum outside London. It's called the Feather Heist or the Feather Thief or
Okay.
something like that. Kirk Johnson, and it is
Okay.
fabulous. Highly
Oh
recommend.
my
Like of all
gosh.
like the weird things to steal. Yeah, he would sell the feathers online to like fly fishermen or like so they could make their lures. Because they
Okay.
so if you want like weird, I'm into weird heists. So this one was like
I
the
know
most
it's unique.
heist. Yeah. So it's a really unique. I think it won awards. It's like it's a fabulous read, and it's a true
Oh
story,
my
which makes
gosh.
it even more kind of like yeah, it's definitely a must read.
That is so cool. So the pigeon and the
I think
feather
it's
heist,
I think it's either the Feather Heist or the Feather Thief. It's just great.
which also now I'm realizing on your Instagram you have lots of photos of birds. Are you also a bird watcher? Is that what am I putting all these pieces together right now?
So yeah, so I'm a COVID birder. So there's nothing to do in 2020 in New York except go to Central Park
Okay.
to look at birds. So yeah, so I think that has
Yes.
totally inflected how I how I read and the types of things I read for
That's
sure.
awesome.
It's hilarious.
I have my moments when I get fixated on something and it shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
So I love that. So where should people follow you to keep up with everything that you've got in the works?
The best way to follow me is Instagram. That's the one that I'm sort of most active on, and that's at author
Mhm.
Mila.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's good. I will link that in the show notes too for everyone. So you guys can all go follow her there as well. And hopefully you'll be on maybe next year or whenever talking about the second addition to Blood Rubies.
That would be fabulous.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's good talking to you.